hairs on my body started standing on end.
Silent. Nothing there.
I fought to get back into my body.
You are going to be of vital importance of helping us convince the masses.
Type 471.
Type 471.
Bridge to the other world.
Bridge to the other world.
Welcome to Type 471. I'm Sam Kitchen. Today, my guest is Todd Neiss. He is the founder and head honcho of the American Primate Conservancy. He's been active in the Bigfoot area for about 30 years, coming up on 30 years. He is based out of Oregon, but he's all over the place. Anywhere where Bigfoot activity is going on, he's investigating it. So, Todd Neiss is the guy to talk to about Bigfoot, and I'm really excited to talk to Todd today. Todd Neiss, welcome to Type 471. How are you?
I'm doing well, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm glad to hear it, and I'm very glad to have you. So I understand that this all started with a very profound experience in the early 90s.
Yes, actually 1993 to be exact, April 3rd. I was introduced to Bigfoot in a, very interesting initiation, if you will. To start off with, I honestly, at that point in my life, I was 34. I wasn't all that interested in the subject of Bigfoot. Of course, growing up in the Pacific Northwest, you can't help but hear about the stories, but I'd pretty much relegated it to just a good old campfire story. Well, that came to an abrupt halt that day. I was a combat engineer in the Oregon Army National Guard, a sergeant at the time. And we, if just for your listeners' edification, a lot of what we do as combat engineers involves the use of high explosives, composition for ammonium nitrate, dynamite, that kind of fun stuff. And so on this particular day, it was actually a pretty nice day for April in the Coast Range. Being a temperate rainforest, we got lucky, had a beautiful, bright, sunny day, and our job on that day, we had three different blasting sites that we were training at, and these were gravel quarries on some private timberland. We had some special permission to get in there and utilize those quarries. So that particular day, the first site was cutting charges. We had sliced steel I-beams in half with C4 plastic explosives. The second site, they had set up a mock minefield with anti-tank mines, and our job at that site was to create a lane, if you will, in order to make it passable. And the third and final site was a cratering charge. Cratering charge would be used in this particular scenario to blow a road in half and deny the enemy the use of that road. And in this case, we used about, 250 pounds of ammonium nitrate we'd been soaking in diesel fuel. So very large explosion. All of them were very large explosions.
These sound very impressive.
Yeah, we had a blasting pit there at the base, but the quantity of explosives we were using that day would have probably broke every window on the base. So they would have us go out once a year to this particular spot and do our exercises. We had lit the fuses on the final explosion for the day. And of course, SOPs is, we get in our vehicles and we convoy out of there and wait for the explosion at a safe location, and then go back and check our work. As we got in the vehicles, I was a passenger in the second Humvee. There were two Humvees up front, a troop transport in the middle, and the commander's Humvee bringing up the rear. But I sat behind the driver, and because it was such a nice day, I had the window down, and I had the opportunity to glance around the countryside as we descended the hill. And having been a hunter for both deer and elk in that actual area in the past, that's kind of what I was doing. I was just looking for wildlife. Well, I found it. When we rounded this corner, the second blast site came into full view. And what struck me was these three dark figures standing right out in the middle of this gravel quarry. And at first I'm like, what the heck are those people doing down there? It hardly got the thought out of my head as I'm looking at it. It's like, those aren't people. They were standing on two legs. And if you can picture the three of them standing side by side, and they were actually watching our convoy as we descended across this ravine. But what got me was, they were huge. Jet black, no sign of any clothing whatsoever on them. The arms were way too long. Reaching all the way down to their knees. And the legs were disproportionate to that of a human as well. They were all just built like bodybuilders. These 4 foot wide shoulders at least, barrel chested. You can literally see the taper down from the chest to the waist. And I'd love to have them on our Seahawk team. I think the three of them could probably hold the line on their own, but
I bet.
Yeah. Yeah, but it was this activity that they were engaged in that really caught my attention. The tallest of the three stood in the middle and stood there like a statue. But the two that were flanking it on its left and right were exhibiting this swaying motion, if you will. Like they were rocking from side to side, shifting weight from one foot to the other. And in the process, these long pendulous arms are swinging in front of their knees. And they did this the entire time I watched them. It was really, really peculiar activity. Something I would come to find to be quite common with these creatures. And why, I don't know. I've heard in talking with a primatologist that that's fairly common with primates when they feel anxious or nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And I say they did it the entire time. I'm not talking some 3 or 5 second something ran in front of my car kind of a sighting. I watched them for a full 25 seconds. So it was a fairly long view encounter.
Yeah,
as encounters go.
You certainly got a good look at them, and from what it seems to me that the swaying back and forth is usually often seen, or is often seen, in association with tree peaking. Like they're standing behind a tree and they're kind of rocking back and forth, kind of peaking a little bit and rocking back behind the tree. Just so I understand, how visible were they? How obscured or not obscured were they?
Well, if you could imagine, the quarries were made of basalt. And basalt is kind of a light gray, almost like a concrete gray. Had they been standing, say, in front of some trees, I probably wouldn't have seen them. But standing out in the open, right out in the open in this gravel quarry with that light gray rock behind them, and them being jet black, the contrast was striking. So yeah, there was no question what I was looking at, and I just, I was just kind of in shock the entire time I'm watching them.
I can imagine.
And yeah, it's seeing something that isn't supposed to be is very traumatic.
Yeah.
So it got kind of interesting after that. Once we lost sight of them, I just kind of slumped back in my seat and was, as you can imagine, my head is just swimming with 1,000 questions, and I'm just trying to make sense of it all. And it wasn't very long that we arrived at this staging area, And I just instinctively got out of the Humvee and started jogging back up in the direction we just come. I wanted so badly to see them again, but I got as far as I dared. We had a policy that, you know, when we're doing something as dangerous as this, that everybody has to be accounted for. So I went as far as I dared, and unfortunately, there was a little bit of a berm, if you will, blocking my view of the quarry. But as I stood there with my hand to my forehead, standing on my tiptoes, just trying to do whatever I could to see them, I heard somebody call out my name. And I look over to my right, and here comes Sergeant Martin. And he was noticing what I was doing, and he said, "Hey, what are you looking at?" And I dropped my hand on my side, and I looked at him. I said, "No, nothing." Well, Jeff proceeded to come my direction, and once he got to where I was at, he looked me right in the eyes, and he said, "I don't suppose you saw what I saw down at that second blast site." And being the great brave guy that I am, I said, "I don't know, Jeff. What did you see?" You know,
Yeah.
and he took a drag off his cigarette and looked left and right to make sure nobody else was in earsight. And he said, "I saw three huge covered Bigfoot, I guess. I don't know." And of course, at that, I said, "Yeah, I just saw him too." You know, and it was great. I mean, to have that corroboration, not really that I needed it. It's just I was happy that somebody else experienced what I had. And it would be the following month that we would get together again for training, and we had two more soldiers come forward, independent of each other, and also claimed to have seen what Jeff and I had experienced. So it's an unusual sighting, in that, you know, multiple animal sightings are fairly rare. Multiple eyewitnesses um, are pretty rare as well. And then, of course, just the nature of what we were doing out there. I mean, we were blowing up the forest, you know, putting up mushroom clouds like 2,500 to 3,000 feet in the air. These were big booms, and that's what I mean. What really struck me was, you know, that took quite a bit of bravery for them to enter that quarry after what had just taken place perhaps less than an hour earlier. Yeah, you'd expect most animals to go, you know, 360 degrees away from that area, and yet these things were curious, and that's what really strikes me, you know, is that curiosity is it's a form of intelligence. I mean, it's the need to know what took place, and to be able to overcome that what innate fear you'd expect. I mean, that sense of curiosity they had was powerful enough to make them come on in and check us out.
I am kind of I'm curious about all of that and how it happened and how much of it you can kind of, because you were there, I wasn't. I mean, I'm listening to your description, but I don't know the layout of everything, etc. So, how likely is it that they must have come in after the blast? And what are the possibilities that maybe they had already been somewhere in this area and were like trying to flee at that time? I mean, what are the likelihoods there?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Sam, because in hindsight, while we were at that site where they ended up appearing, we were we had two squads. I was a squad leader. I had my squad, and I was directing them as to how to run this det cord and clip into the det, what we call a ring main, clip on their blocks of C4 to place them next to the mines. That, so we're all kind of, you know, hunkered down, focusing on what we're doing. And I distinctly recall hearing a very loud whoop kind of sound. And you know, when we're doing this, we have to train as we would in actual battle. And that requires noise discipline as well as light discipline and so on. So when I heard this silly whoop sound, I've looked up. I was going to try to find out who did that and discipline them about that. But I looked up and everybody was still busy doing what they were doing, and in it, in a sense, it sounded like it was coming from further back in the woods. So your point is interesting, because I just think in hindsight they had to have been fairly close to that explosion, if in fact that's what created that noise. And I don't know what else could have. And I've heard that type of vocalization since on many occasions, and so I do think they were not far away from it.
Right. And then all of a sudden their home is, blowing up and they have to go check out and see what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been like a small earthquake there for a moment, and of course a lot of rock and shrapnel raining down all around the forest. So it's very possible they were not far off.
Right. That kind of sounds probable to me, and it's actually making me wonder. I mean, because you had the opportunity to be at ground zero to see how they reacted to what was happening in their midst. But like it makes me wonder how they might react to wildfire. I mean, we know how that they're obviously very impacted by wildfire, but like the behavior as they see disaster coming. I think this has the potential to kind of give us a little bit of insight into their behavior when they see trouble afoot. Do you know what I mean? Like some kind of a threat. So I think whereas most animals run in the opposite direction, like you were saying, a Sasquatch behaves very differently, and it's just making me wonder how they respond to any number of disasters, essentially.
Well, I mean, surely they've dealt with forest fires in the past. I mean, much of it's caused by nature anyway. So I think in this particular situation, these three were acting as sort of a lookout, if you will, for others that may have been in the area.
Sure.
But again, the only thing I could equate it to, just as an example, is say you're sitting on your porch at home, nice sunny day, you're just relaxing, and then suddenly, out of the blue, literally comes a jet airliner, and it say it crashes 3 or 4 blocks away from your house. There's an explosion, there's this fire and smoke, and the ground will shake, and I sure you're going to be in shock for several moments, but I think in the long run, within, you know, 10 or 15 minutes, you're going to be drawn to the disaster site, if not to see if you can help in any way, or just morbid curiosity. You would be able to get over it as long as you knew there wasn't, more coming. And I think that's kind of what happened. They had this disaster, if you will, happening right in their neighborhood, and they, out of curiosity, came to check it out.
Right.
And
they sent
yeah,
out the first responders.
yeah, there you go. I like that.
Yeah. There was something else about what you mentioned that I'm just curious about it, and I don't have any data, pertaining to this, but it just seems to me that when three or more are spotted, the tallest one is usually right in the middle. Does that seem to be the case with you? Like in all the reports you've come across over the years, when three or more are spotted, does it seem to you that the tallest one is most often in the middle?
Well, I can't say for certain. I do think, though, that one in the middle exhibited exactly the proper behavior that we see quite often with these things, is they just stand still. It's one of their talents, if you will, in avoiding being seen. And if they do stand still, they're very hard to see it. And perhaps these two, being a little bit shorter, might have been more adolescent, if you will, and maybe less disciplined than that one in the middle. But that one in the middle just stood there, just like I said, like a statue, and for whatever reason, these other two just overreacted, perhaps. But that's just my take on it. I think curiosity is really their Achilles heel, if you will. I think I've
Sure.
always said you don't find Bigfoot, Bigfoot finds you, and then in 99% of the cases that's true.
Hmm.
And once and they're very curious about it, so that's normally when they're spotted, is when they're pretty much focused on humans and whatever activity they're involved in, and generally when they do get spotted, when they realize they've been compromised, they just casually turn and walk off into the woods.
Hmm.
Normally, not always.
Yeah, and I know that you are determined to exploit that curiosity. What are some methods that you've come up with?
Well, Sam, we use a combination of both conventional and unconventional techniques. Obviously, you're not going to be able to run these things to ground. They can outmaneuver you. They know the area better than you, and they're very agile and fast. I frankly think the world looks pretty flat, regardless of how many mountains are there. But that is exactly what we try to do: is exploit this curiosity. There's a number of different ways. Like I say, conventionally, for instance, we've tried using different types of bait, which is conventional. On the unconventional side, we've done things like try to present them with things that will pique their curiosity, but without the fear factor, if you will. Simple things like hanging chemical light sticks from branches.
Hmm.
There's at night, they're going to see this soft glow, and it's not making noise or anything intimidating. They might come check it out. And I've done some experimentation that way as well. In fact, back in 1998, I had put together an expedition and was fortunate enough to have as my teammates Peter Byrne and Ron Moorhead.
Hmm.
I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with those names.
Oh, yeah.
And I came up with this kind of Pavlov's dog kind of experiment where I had brought three different types of bait and placed them on three stumps not far from each other. On one, I had placed a red apple. The other, I placed a cob of corn, so yellow corn, and then just a white potato on the third one. And then just before dark, I would um, crack these, activate these light sticks, putting a red one with the apple, a yellow one with the corn, a white one with the potato. And then I would hang some tubular wind chimes, or just a small set of chimes that would kind of act as a dinner bell, if you will.
Hmm.
And my hope was that, over time, like with Pavlov's dog, that we could bring them in just perhaps with the light sticks and take the bait away, and then eventually take away the light sticks and just and try to see if we can just bring them in with the bells. But by associating those three things, we figured we could get some sort of response that way. And so things like that. I've had friends that have actually taken CDs, just blank CDs, and hang them with fishing line during the daytime in sunlight. And as they spin in the wind, the reflection of the sun off, they kind of put off a rainbow of colors.
Right. Oh, that's a good
So,
idea.
I mean, yeah, I mean, nobody's got it right yet, Sam. And let's just, so we gotta try different things, and I'm working on some other experiments in that regard. But I think it's inevitable we will get some concrete evidence, and that's really what the Conservancy is about. It's the discovery, research, knowledge, collection of data, if you will, and to get to the point where we can get them find enough evidence to get them scientifically classified,
Mm.
with
Yep.
the ultimate goal of affording them some sort of legal protections from anybody harming or even killing one.
Mhm.
And that's our ultimate goal. And so we're kind of, as far as discovery, well, they're being discovered quite often. If you travel in the circles I do, you almost hear something on a weekly basis, and so discovery's happening, and it's been happening for thousands of years. And I mean, if you go back even into Native American lore, you find that they've been living symbiotically with them, if you will, for just thousands of years. We've dated Native Americans at least in America back to about 19,000 years.
Yes.
And we, as Westerners or Europeans, have been here 300 years. So who do you think's got the most information on them? So I put a lot of credence into the Native American lore, and they don't treat them like they don't describe them like they would any other animal. In fact, they describe them as another tribe of people,
Absolutely.
and they refer to them as the old ones or the first ones, which tells you that they were here before Homo sapiens arrived on the scene.
Right.
So, in that sense, I put them in the category of an ancient hominid, not too unlike Cro-Magnon or Neanderthal, but one which has endured over the years where others have died out. But I I don't see them really as an ape so much as a primate, which people are considered primate if you study biology. So it's just we these things are robust enough and have evolved enough to survive all these years, and they're out there. Their numbers are I don't think very high, and that's our concern with the health of the species. We're hoping to someday be able to study them closer, and they may be perfectly fine, but I'd rather err on the side of caution when it comes to this species, because I would just I would feel horrible if through ignorance or greed that we just somehow watch yet another species go into extinction, and because they're wonderful creatures, and I just want to make sure that my children, my grandchildren, my great grandchildren will have hopefully as at least as good of a chance of witnessing what I did back in '93.
Oh, yeah. It would absolutely be heartbreaking if the Sasquatch met, the fate of so many extinct animals. It would be especially heartbreaking just because of what they are and what they represent and how much we can learn from them and how much they have to teach us about ourselves. And, like,
Exactly.
yeah. Like what you've said about the ancient past is such a huge part of it for me personally. I'm trying to understand some things about humanity by kind of comparing and contrasting the Sasquatch, and part of that involves like the ancient past, the truly deep past, and like you said, I mean, it goes back a long ways. These interactions go back a long way. As a matter of fact, I mean, squatching goes back to the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Right.
There was some squatching going on there. The ancient past, the connection to humanity. There's so much that we have to learn from the Sasquatch, and it's whatever it is, it's a truly ancient part of the human story, and I really feel that we need to understand that. And if they went extinct, that would just be heartbreaking for so many reasons.
Extinction is every bit as part of nature as evolution, if you will. It's the survival of the fittest, and certainly these are some very fit animals to be sure. But we have photographs of dozens of species of animals that were known to exist that are just gone, and it just makes me wonder if there was some way we could have intervened in stopping that. Take, for instance, the passenger pigeon. They numbered in the trillions and flew in very large flocks that would almost blot out the sun at one time. And people would shoot them for sport, right? I mean, going back as far as pre-cell phone telegraph. We had one town would see them coming and open up on them just for quote unquote sport. And then they would get on the telegraph and let the next town down the road know that they're on their way, and everybody'd pull out their shotguns, and it was just really a bloodbath. And when it comes to that particular species, they actually had captured the last known passenger pigeon back in the 1930s, and it was kept it in the Cincinnati Zoo. In fact, they named it Martha, and they tried different, crossbreeding with other types of pigeons and what have you, and it all failed. And one day, Martha just expired, and that race vanished off the face of the earth. This is the first time in history that we knew the exact date, the hour, the minute of an extinction, and we watched it happen. We made it up, and we caused it. And so, you look at the Tasmanian tiger, the dodo bird, and others that we've got plenty of photographs of, but they're just gone. And in so much as we can have some sort of intervention to keep this species with us, I'd really like for that to happen. And the thing is, Sam, is it's open season right now. There are really no laws, at least nothing substantial that prohibits anybody from killing one of these things, and that's what I'm afraid of. Extinction does not have to come down to the last individual of a particular species. In fact, there's something called technical extinction, which happens when any species gets, their numbers dip below 200 or 300. What happens then is you have interbreeding, and you have all kinds of illnesses. It affects their immune systems, and so you don't have to kill the last one. If their numbers drop below, say, 200 or 300, then they're pretty much doomed to extinction. Back when Native Americans first came on the scene, there was a whole lot of real estate to go around. As a rule, they ceded certain areas to this species. Just for instance, in the Pacific Northwest, the names, there's a lot of names. Ithiaha, Bequas, Tasanaquah, Bigfoot, and Sasquatch, and Oma, and so forth. But there was one name that was common between the tribes that was born of the Chinook, what's called a Chinook jargon, and these were Indians that lived up along the Columbia River. And this was a major trading area where different tribes would gather together. So they kind of came up with this Pig Latin, if you will, words that they can use in the process of trading with one another. And so this language, this trade jargon, if you will, had a name for Bigfoot at the time, and it was called Skookum. Well, now, if you look across the Pacific Northwest, Henry Franzoni did a very good research on geographical name places and how they might associate with the Sasquatch. And there were over 40 geographic name places that use the name Skookum. I'm sure a lot of people are aware of Skookum Meadows up in Washington, but there's Skookum River, Skookum Creek, Skookum Falls, Skookum Butte, and so on. And it's thought that wherever that name was attached to a geographic name place, it was kind of like off limits to humans. It was just a no-go zone where they, like I say, they ceded it to the Bigfoot. With the onslaught of Europeans coming here to the North America, we're encroaching more and more every day into what would be traditional habitat for these things, and the kind of things we need to find out. What sort of habitats do they need? What sort of food resources are needed in order to sustain the species? What's the caloric intake for one of these big guys in just a day?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I was wondering about this recently. Like, how many calories do they need in a day? Like, an average human, an adult human is about 2,000 calories on average. So how many calories does a Sasquatch need? Just one adult Sasquatch?
Exactly. Well, Dr. Fehrenbach, a primatologist that used to research here in the Pacific Northwest. Um, he did some calculations based on his knowledge of the mountain gorillas, for instance, and he basically extrapolated data from the mountain gorillas, and he came up with about a 6,000 calorie per day per individual. So you can imagine, and there's plenty of food out here. I mean, I can walk around my house, and of course, I live in the forest, in Mount Hood National Forest. I could walk around in about 15 minutes, come up with about a dozen different things that would sustain humans. There's plenty around, but I just think, from the moment they wake up, they've just got to be harvesting and gathering food or hunting for that matter.
Oh, it's a full-time job. And I'm surprised that 6,000 calories was the estimate. That feels a little bit lean to me. I mean, we're talking about like an 8 to 10 foot tall being. With every inch, the body mass increases exponentially, the muscle mass, bone mass, everything. So 6,000, is that all? I mean, I would think double that, 12,000.
Well, again, that's the kind of thing that we need to find out.
Yeah, exactly.
For instance, if someday one were to be captured, we would have to know, what do they need? What do we need to do to make sure that they're getting a healthy diet? And again, all those questions. What is their lifespan? What is their range? The range for just one individual. And again, going back to Dr. Fehrenbach, he estimated that a single individual, based upon the amount of food resources, would require a range of 60 square miles just for one individual. So you can imagine if you have a clan of these things, if that's the right word, then they're going to cover a pretty huge territory, and probably on a daily basis.
In this area, at any rate, but on the East Coast and areas where there are higher concentrations of food sources, they don't need to travel quite as far, and that could possibly account for their greater presence in areas such as Kentucky, Tennessee, all the way up into New York. How do you feel about that?
And Ohio, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so when I think about their food resources, I do believe them to be omnivorous, based on eyewitness accounts. They'll both harvest all kinds of vegetable matter, and then as far as their travel is concerned, I think a lot of it is seasonally based, partially due to the weather. Certainly, it'd be difficult for them to survive if once their water resources are frozen solid. They'd have to come down in elevation. And there again, we have seasonal food sources. Our salmon runs, for instance, we've got summer steelhead, we have fall chinook, winter steelhead, and spring chinook, and these things come through. I mean, you can almost set your watch to them, and you can be sure that they're aware of that pattern as well. They've been seen harvesting fish. In one particular case, a gentleman was hiking up this creek to go fishing, and the trail crossed over the creek, over this small bridge, and he got partway across that bridge and looked upstream and saw what he thought was a bear at the bank of the creek. But as he looked at it, he's just like, something's not right, and the thing was rolling rocks over, and then it did something very unusual, something bears can't do. It started palming rocks and lifting them out and setting them aside. And as he said, just about the time that happened, this thing happened to catch wind of him. One of the rare cases where they're not aware that they're being seen. And as soon as it saw the fisherman, it stood up and walked off into the woods. And when he got his courage up to go where he had seen it, the entire beach was littered with crawdads. So we know they eat credit. So you just add that to the list. But
Mhm.
I do think they are opportunists, scavengers, as well as predators.
Mhm.
Um, their ability to hurl very large rocks with extreme accuracy is just um, amazing.
Yeah.
And I had a gentleman I was just researching up at the Riley Horse Camp on the west flank of Mount Hood, and he happened to be walking on these trails and had to answer the call of nature, if you will, and he took a pee, and just about the time he finished, this bowling ball sized rock came hurling over the trees and nailed the tree that he was standing next to, and it hit the tree square on at 70 feet up, and then as that boulder came down, it busted off a bunch of branches, and he couldn't believe it. He said I could hardly lift the thing, let alone throw it 5 feet, and yet this thing came hurling over the trees, and again with speed and accuracy and the amount of strength you'd need. But I kind of look at that, and he goes, I don't know why it did it, but I said, I think I do, because I had it happen to me once after I had to go to the bathroom. Again, going back to 1998, I had one roar at me from less than 80 feet away. And I mean, we're talking the most ungodly roar, scream, whatever you want to call it. It went on for about 3 seconds, and you just felt it. And
Mhm.
it came from behind this hedge. It didn't show itself, but there's nothing. I'm telling you, I've heard cougars, I've heard bear. There's nothing out there that at least that we know of that could have produced that sound. And I froze I was frozen for like 2 minutes. I could not move. I just literally was waiting to die. But again, I believe it was in response to my urinating, and I told him, and I've actually, his was the sixth encounter that was based on a male urinating, and I think it was they're reacting like anyone would if somebody was marking their territory.
Right.
I'm sure that's how they um, perceived it.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And man, that rock, that's like having a cannon fired at you, a cannonball.
Exactly. Well, and I've have another friend up in Alaska that moors his boat about 100 feet offshore. This aluminum fishing boat, and he's had a lot of activity. It's a very remote location. He couldn't bring it in because it was too much of a draft. He'd go from to shore with an inflatable.
Mhm.
And one night they heard large splashes out in the bay, and then a couple loud metallic clinks, and went out the next day and found that they had hit the boat twice, and in one case the rock was inside the boat, and this is 100 feet offshore.
Wow.
So but yeah, you're right. I mean, and I what better weapon for hunting if you were to come across a herd of deer, to lob a cannonball into that group. You don't have to kill them, you just have to maim them to where you can catch them, and I'm sure that's what they do.
Oh yeah. I mean, that makes perfect sense. I mean, you use what's available to you. They're strong as hell. They can pick up, an incredibly heavy rock and throw it with accuracy. I mean, why wouldn't they kill deer that way? Just nail them in the head. I mean, any deer of any size would be done for.
Yeah, too easy.
Yeah. I just want to go back to something because this thought occurred to me while you were talking about extinction. Um,
Hmm.
how ironic would it be if we had to use DNA that we have currently submitted in an effort to prove their existence, the same DNA that is so often overlooked? What if we one day had to use that DNA to bring them back from extinction? The very DNA that was in such doubt all along.
Well, and that makes me think, you mentioned them possibly having adverse reaction to human diseases. Could not the opposite be true? Is it possible that in studying these things, we might find out that something in their DNA would be useful for us, a cure for AIDS or cancer or COVID or whatever, we don't know. Their DNA has got to be ancient, to say the least, and they may have developed immunities to things that afflict humans. But so you can go both ways on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent point, and that's part of the hope, or one of those many things that's encompassed in all this stuff that we need to learn from them. I mean, whatever we find there, it's going to be extremely fascinating. I mean, whether we find cures for human diseases or not, it's still going to instruct us and tell us so much and help us, So, I mean, I can't wait. I just need to have this solved within my lifetime. And you seem to think that this is, you're encouraged that official recognition is somewhat imminent.
Well, so how does that take place? There is a body out of Stockholm, Sweden, known as the International Union of Conservation of Nature, and this is an international group that is tasked with the job of not only recognizing new species, but monitoring the health of other species. The IUCN has what they call the red list, and there's 9 different stages of life, if you will, in terms of the health of, we think of things like endangered or threatened, but there's actually 9 different levels between not threatened whatsoever and extinction. And so their job is to track these things, and to they have the fortune of being able to actually ascribe binomial names, like Homo sapien or Homo florensis or what have you. They actually make those calls. And what's interesting is in that red list, there are a couple of stages that kind of open the door just a little bit to the Sasquatch question. One of them is not evaluated, and it just basically means it has not yet been evaluated against the criteria. But there's another one, though, that the second one up on the list there is called data deficient. And I don't really like to read it all, but I'm just going to put this out here because I think it's important. Data deficient is one which has been categorized by the IUCN as offering insufficient information for a proper assessment of the conservation status to be made. This does not necessarily indicate that the species has not been extensively studied, but it does indicate that little or no information is available for the abundance and distribution of the species. And so maybe there is a category that these things fit in, right?
Yeah.
And it's official. And in reading the Endangered Species Act of 1973, I've been through it, and it's rather boring and dry, but there are 2 statements that jumped out at me as I went through that. It says the authority to list a species as endangered or threatened is not restricted to the species as recognized in formal taxonomic terms. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
They have the authority to list a species as endangered without it even being formally taxonomically identified. And it goes on to say the act is intended to authorize listing some entities that are not accorded the taxonomic rank of species. So we've got that, and I think that fits our subject very well.
Indeed, and it sounds like you would like to exploit that loophole.
Yeah, and people tried before. I know both here in the United States and in Canada there have been a couple of attempts by individuals to get them listed, and it's a real hard sell without having a type species or DNA to back it up.
Right.
The Conservancy has taken a different approach to this. We're not so much interested, at least initially, in going directly to the Department of the Interior, for instance, which lords over the Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife and BLM and all that, the Bureau of Land Management and all that, because as others have found out, you're not even going to get a hearing without more to go on. So the Conservancy is going at it kind of backwards, if you will. We are working with several tribes, to especially those that have reservations. These are considered nation individual nations within the United States and Canada, and there's thousands of them where they have their own autonomy, where they make their own rules, and especially when it comes to natural resources and wildlife. So because they've had such extensive experience with these things, it's a much easier sell, if you will, to get with these tribes, to get with the council, and help them um, develop an initiative, if you will, that will hold authority, at least in so much as the boundaries of their reservations. And it's a win-win, because not only does it afford protections for any Sasquatch that may be on that reservation, but it also bolsters their own customs and their own traditions and their culture. So we've put together a draft initiative that's kind of a plug and play initiative that you can insert, the we the people of the nation of Omaha, for instance, um, and it would read the Omaha Nation Indigenous Satanga Act, and that's what they call them in Nebraska, is Satanga.
Mhm.
And so you can plug in different tribal names and different names which they um, use to describe these creatures, and once we get them on board, and we're working with about 5 different tribes right now. Once this catches on, I think it'll catch on like wildfire across the country, at least in so much as other reservations. It's kind of a way to, put a finger in the eye of the white man by just kind of going, you might not believe it, but we know it. We recognize this as an ancient indigenous species, and we will protect them. Once you get, once we get several hundred tribes on board, then it's going to be a whole lot easier to go to the Department of the Interior and say, look, you are surrounded by hundreds, if not thousands, of tribes that have officially recognized this creature. Now, do your job.
Oh, Todd, you have a plan. I love that. I'm excited to see that. That's so cool. And you know what? I think it's really sweet because it shows how deeply you care about the Sasquatch. And it's a far-sighted plan. I love it.
Yeah, I think it'll get traction, and so we'll kind of see where that goes.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you run into people who say, "Oh, just leave them alone; they're doing fine." Well, again, it's a romantic notion that's based on zero science,
Mm-hmm.
and whether it's a healthy species or not. Again, I think the best practice is to err on the side of caution until we actually do know the health of that species.
Speaking of which, 30 years on, what can you say that you feel comfortable in yourself you know about the Sasquatch that you did not know when all of this began? What have you learned that you feel you are certain that you have learned that this is a truth?
Well, the learning curve is very very large in dealing with this, and I've learned a lot, and I've had to eat crow a few times. I try to focus on the subject from a biological scientific basis, and of course, as you know, there's a number of uh, people that tend to attribute some paranormal behavior. I have many friends that fall in that category. We can agree to disagree, but when you hear certain things so many times, there's always a bit of truth
Mm-hmm.
in everything. And I'll give you, for instance, something that I'd kind of put in what we call the woo category.
Mm-hmm.
Is this description of eye shine. To me, it didn't make a whole lot of sense just biologically. It seems like it would be counterproductive to have, light coming out of your eyes. It would ruin it. You'd think it'd have the opposite effect. It would destroy your night vision.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of had put that in that category. And let's just say I had another epiphany, moment of truth when I went back to the Omaha Reservation last October. I had been talking for years with some of the Native members and a couple in particular, and they invited me out there. And based on what they told me, I got on the next flight out, and I spent a week with them. And I'll be damned if they took me to a couple of different areas where they had done their research on the reservation. And the eastern boundary of the Omaha Reservation is the Missouri River.
Mm-hmm.
There's some very large rolling hills that are heavily timbered with hardwoods, maple, oak, what have you, very thick. And they would take me in there at night. We would start around midnight in two different locations, and my friend would he would call out into the darkness in his language to the apparently Bigfoot. Was what he said that he gets very common, gets reactions. And I'm okay, let's go out there. You can't see the hand in front of your face. We have all the lights off. We're not talking eye reflection like you get sometimes with flash photography. Even on the human eyes, you get that red eye reflection off the back of the retina. He calls out to these out into the woods, and all of a sudden, within 15, 20 seconds, a pair of eyes light up, like 80 to 100 feet away. And I'm like, no way. No way. And then all of a sudden, a second pair would come on, and sometimes three sets of eyes glowing in the dark. And they would move, and they'd blink, and they would change in intensity and even in color at times.
Wow.
This went on for 5 nights in a row. I went out Monday through Friday from midnight to sometimes 2:33 in the morning. And without fail, we had this phenomenon of eye shine. And along with it, a lot of vocalizations, some of which I've heard before, others that were just kind of new to me, but not a traditional common animal vocalization. I mean, incredibly powerful and very varied. I remember in one case, the first night we got out there, we had this what I assumed to be a female call out in what really sounded like a song, and it would go on for 5 to 6 seconds, and it would change in volume, and it would change in tone, and it would have very distinct notes to it, and then there would be a 10-second break, and she would repeat it again. And she repeated it probably 4 times within 1 minute. And I have to tell you, Sam, it was beautiful. There was nothing threatening or intimidating about it. It was absolutely wonderful. I wish I would have got it on recorded, but
That's amazing.
anytime you have repetition like that, there's some meaning to it. You have to admit it's lingual, And I noticed that too in some of Ron Moorhead's recordings that he did in the high Sierras back in the 70s. One track in particular where there was some sort of a banter back and forth between a couple of animals, you would hear the word "pourquoi," and I'm like, first time I heard it, I go, huh, it almost sounded like a question. It was like "pourquoi," and it did this one particular uh, animal. It repeated that 5 times within just maybe a minute and a half, and I'm going, Ron, that's a word. You don't just make that noise. There's meaning to it. And so with this female, I call her the singer, and we heard her 2 nights later. She just did one verse, if you will, but it was exactly like what she did 2 nights earlier.
That is
And
amazing.
yeah, there was definitely meaning in it, and it was not threatening whatsoever. It was almost welcoming. And my friend has established a relationship with these things for over 2 years. There's no question they're familiar with him. They know him, and he's been able to get them to sound off. And again, that whole eye shine thing. Well, uh, I guess I didn't know everything. What I'd written that off, and you asked me what's the learning curve. What do you know now that you didn't then? Well, I've got another mystery to solve.
Right.
I got to find out how they do it. I believe I may have discovered some possible answers. Um, they're I think that it's I want to say Discovery Channel or one of these programs just a month or so back came out with a 3-part series with the entire series was filmed in night vision, all of it, and very high technology in that instead of this green grainy kind of stuff you see in what I've used in the military. This is full color spectrum and very clear. And they went all over the world filming animals at night with this very sophisticated night vision just to be able to see how they behave when we normally can't see them. And there was one species, because we know bioluminescence happens in nature quite a bit in say the marine world. Um, um, Photoplankton, deep sea fish will generate their own light. And on the land, we've got, fireflies and chemically generate light. Certain amphibians and some plants. So but my thing is we're talking about a mammal and something very, very close to human.
Yeah, a
And I've
primate, no
just,
less.
yeah. So um, they were filming one particular mammal, not a primate, but in this case, it was they were in Argentina filming a puma, similar to our mountain lions or cougar that we have here. And they were filming a mother puma hunting at night with 3 smaller kittens, if you will. And the eyes, even with the night vision, the eyes were almost blindingly bright through the lens of the camera. And they flat out claim that even not looking through that night vision camera, their eyes generated enough light that you could see them in pitch black.
A
And they
puma.
mentioned, yeah, there was a certain name, a scientific name for that process, and so I'm trying to see if there's somehow we can link that to our big guys, but it is possible. It's absolutely possible. So here again, they were talking about a very ancient animal that is a species that has held on to some sort of a genetic trait that may no longer exist in the hominid species, but yet I can't unsee what I saw, you know. And
Right.
I mean, 5 nights in a row this happened. There was one case where we were not getting a lot of activity. So he said, I know this place is about 4 miles away and it's a rough road, but we can go check over there. So we went, way off the beaten path, and no other tracks had gone in before us. And we get to this one area where it kind of cleared up, and there was a road in front of us. So we just turned off all the lights and we sat still, and he calls out to in the dark. He calls out, "Oho, Hige," which means hello, friends. Then you'd say Gigaho, which means come closer. And I'm telling you, Sam, right down the road, set of eyes light up. Like 10 seconds later, I'm like, oh my God. And it was moving, shifting left and right. You could see it blink. And I'm like, and then we caught a second one trying to outflank us and come around behind us. And I'm just like, I'm excited, but I'm kind of frustrated too. I'm like, there's got to be more. And I turned to my friend. I said, have you ever just thought about walking up to him? And he looked at me like I was crazy. He's like, no. And I'm like, hold my beer. And he's like, what? And I go, just stay here. And I walked. I couldn't even see the road, but I did know it that those eyes lined up with the direction the car was pointed. And I just started walking into the night toward these eyes, these set of eyes. And it was probably 120 feet away, and I got within about 50 feet when they finally turned and went off.
So
he still talks about that crazy white boy
who was playing the game of chicken with the Sasquatch and actually won.
Well, I didn't know. I knew I had very limited time left, and I, we could go out there, and I'm telling you, we're so consistent that I could almost guarantee you, if you want to meet me in Omaha City, I could show you that tomorrow.
Wow.
Tonight. It was just amazing.
That's incredible.
At one point, yeah, and at one point I got to tell you this because this was really special. I want to say it was Wednesday, so halfway through my trip, and again, we weren't getting as much activity as we normally were. And so he looks at me and says, I'm going to try something. He says, I haven't done this in a while. And this guy's he's a very devout Mormon. And he said, I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray with them because sometimes I get a reaction. So I'm like, whatever, I'll try anything. So he calls out to them and he says, hey, I want to pray for you and for your family and for your safety and your happiness. And I want to speak to our creator. And if you want, please, feel free to come forward and join me. And he bows his head and starts praying. And I kid you not, about halfway through this 3-minute prayer, this one sounds off maybe 50 feet away from us. And it just did this series of whoops. And it did it 4 times, very loud and very close. It just whoop, 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 and I wanted to look up, but at the same time, I didn't. And I waited till he finished. And I looked at him. I goes, "Is that them?" And he goes, "Yeah." He said, "I told you sometimes that works. They dig it."
Yeah.
So yeah. So anyway, that was one of the highlights of my nearly 30 years in research, that trip, and I'm looking forward to going back there again soon.
I should think so. Wow, that is amazing. Everything about that is amazing. So, I mean, you actually believe that they are, in fact, bioluminescing from their eyes, correct?
So not so much. They're not projecting light. That I got to make that clear, because that would be self-defeating. What I think is that they have special receptors in the back of their eyes that, like early night vision equipment, just tends to suck in any sort of moonlight or zodiac glow that's out there and amplifies it.
Right.
And gives them the ability to see at night. And frankly, they own the night. They tend to be very active at night. And if they have this capability, and I believe they do, then like I say, they own the night.
Right.
It would help them in terms of hunting and give them a great advantage over pretty much any other animal out there.
Absolutely. And you recently mentioned to me, and you were just talking about it a moment ago as well, this very sophisticated night vision that creates a full color high def image. Is this infrared technology?
No, it's different. We have both FLIR with infrared uh, scope that it picks up heat, not so much light.
Right.
In other words, you could use it. It functions the same way whether it's dark or light. If there's a body of heat out there, whether it's night or day, you'll pick it up through that scope. This um this newer technology is amazing. I happen to just recently purchased um, a camera like this, and it's unlike any I've ever seen. It's better than what I used in the military, and it you could literally make out colors, almost every color of the rainbow. If I had the lights off at night in front of my house, I would be able to see that my truck is red, my BMW is blue, the canoe is yellow, and it's just fascinating. It's a game changer. This is just amplifying any sort of light that's out there. And even when we say, "Oh, it's pitch black, I can't see the hand from my face," there's light out there.
Sure.
It's just not usable light for us, but there is light. And so the night vision equipment we have is very distinctly different than the thermal cameras. That one picks up heat, one amplifies light, and but between the two, they're very valuable tools for our research.
Absolutely.
And they film as well, so you could take either snapshots, still shots, or video,
Right.
and with sound even. So I mean, it's pretty cool stuff. And that's you talk about how things have changed and over time. Um, what's really exciting is how the technology is trickling down, and with it the prices.
Oh yeah.
So my tool chest is completely different than what it was when I first started many years ago. Um, um, we have seismic sensors. This is a kit of specialized sensors that actually register vibration in the ground
Oh, cool.
and will transmit that signal, up to 2 miles line of sight to a receiver. So whatever's triggering it has no idea that it's doing it, but the range on these, the ones that I have, and I have a set of four, the detection range is, depending on the substrate, is phenomenal. I've actually been able to put them in of course, this is an ideal substrate, but on a football field, I've actually been able to put one on the other end of the field, 100 yards away, and then stomp really hard, and it will trigger at 100 feet, 100 yards away.
From
But
from
again,
your foot on the other end of the football
yes,
field? Ooh, that's
yes.
cool.
Well, I've set them up. I set the four of them up in a series at about 20 to 25 yards apart from each other. And like one will have a single beep, the other will have two, the third one will have three, and the fourth one is kind of a clicker sound. And you could hear them go off in succession as that shock wave traveled across that football field. Just fascinating.
Yeah. Wow, you're giving me all sorts of ideas, Todd.
Well, they're only as endless as technology develops, but yeah, it's a whole new game. We're using drones quite often. We own two of them here at the Conservancy, and I'm planning to retrofit one of them with a thermal camera. Uh, Teledyne just came out with one that's pretty cool, and it's designed to work with one of the drones I have. And so we'll have one drone that just uses a standard camera, and the other one can use the thermal camera.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I mean, you're kind of getting it from all angles, getting as much coverage as you can. That's cool. And
Sure.
I'm really excited about this monocular that you were talking to me about the other night, the psionics. I want to get my hands on one of those, especially because of the price. Part of what's so discouraging about, trying to get tools for Bigfooting is the price of these things. Like
Sure.
thermal imagery or thermal technology is insanely expensive. But if you have an alternative in this monocular that is only $600, which is relatively inexpensive by comparison to a lot of this stuff, then
Oh yeah.
that gives a lot of hope.
Yeah, the base model's 600, and they've got a couple of different levels that actually step up from there. And the cool thing about it too is I've never owned a night vision camera that you can't use them in daylight. You'll destroy the sensors.
Mhm.
But this one actually has daylight, twilight, and night settings to where you can use it just like a regular standard video camera during the daylight, and just adjust it as the lighting changes. It has a Bluetooth capability it will transmit whatever you're seeing in the eyepiece to, say, an individual standing with you or near you that has a tablet. They can see exactly what you're looking at on their tablet.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow.
Pretty cool stuff.
That is very cool stuff. I'm curious what you would think about my initial Sasquatch encounter, the sighting I had at Whiskeytown Lake near Redding when I was 17 years old. It was a very atypical sort of experience. So I want to just run it by you and see what you have to think about it. Because, like when you're approaching this from just a nuts and bolts physical, mundane animal point of view, it seems very atypical. So I want to know what you have to say about it.
Sure.
All right, cool. So I was 17. I was hanging out with my friend in Redding at like 2:00 in the morning. We were bored out of our minds, so we went up to a popular beach at Whiskeytown Lake. And I've gone over this before, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. We went up to Brandy Creek Beach to see if any of our friends were there. And I pulled up into the parking lot, made plenty of noise. My headlights were on. We got out of the car. My friend he stood back behind the tree line, but I went further down the beach past the tree line. And as I did so, I saw this figure squatted at the water's edge. It was twirling something around in the water. As soon as I saw it, I knew that there was something very different about it, but I was telling myself that this was just a person because, Bigfoot wasn't on my mind in those days. And so I go down to it and I'm kind of checking it out, and then I go back to my friend and I'm like, there's somebody down there, and he's kind of sketched out, so he stays back behind the tree line. And then I went back and I got within like 15 feet of this individual, and I was standing right behind it, and I called down to it and I'm like, hey, what are you doing? And at that point he just kind of straightens his back and straightens his shoulders, and he looks over his right shoulder at me, and then he just looks right back at the water and the thing he's twirling around in the water, and he goes right back to what he's doing. So,
No.
so in all of this, like, he heard me coming, he saw my headlights, he saw me and heard me come down to the beach and then go back to my friend and then come back down to him and come very, very close to him. And he did nothing. He made no effort to get away. In fact, he didn't leave until after I left. So, I mean, all of that, none of that makes sense from the point of view of just a mundane animal with, mundane interests and concerns. So I just wanted to know what you have to say about that, what you think of it.
Did it make any noise at all?
As a matter of fact, this is a main aspect of the whole thing. When the entire encounter, I had a very, very strong sense of sadness coming from this individual. He was actually acting very pouty, like a scolded child would, like the way he was twirling this thing around in the water. He was acting very sad. And as I approached it, I'm listening to my footfalls in the sand, but I also heard this pathetic mewling sound coming from it, kind of like, it was just kind of wailing and moaning a little bit. Yeah, but that was
It never stood up.
No, never stood up. He just straightened his back, looked over his shoulder at me, and then looked right back at the water and went back to twirling this thing around.
That's very unusual with the Bigfoot. When they, like I say, when they feel they've been compromised, oh God, they saw me, and then they get up and walk away normally. But you bring up a good point. We as humans, we tend to personify these things, and that's what really makes this species attractive to us, because they're a lot like us. They walk on two legs, and the problem with that is that we also have a tendency to stereotype them, as if, you'll hear people say, oh, they're very nice, they're very curious, they're not threatening. And in other cases, they are just the opposite. And I can't emphasize enough how individual each of these things are. They're as individual as you or I.
Right.
And if you, both in physiologically as well as mentally and emotionally, they have their own personalities. And so I think it's good that we understand that, because I have to put it in be careful what you ask for category. Don't think, any animal can be dangerous, just like people. We have very decent people and we have very bad people out there.
Mm-hmm.
We've got mass murderers out there. And that's just the human race. So, and any animal could be dangerous, depending on the circumstances. They, even a good person has a bad day, and so we need to keep that in mind. If there's offspring in the area, or if they're feeding on a kill, I would caution people to be very careful.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm really surprised you were able to get that close. Was there any odor associated with it?
Nope, no odor. I assume you're getting at, like, maybe it had put off an odor as a defense mechanism to kind of deter me, or stun me like they do sometimes. The only thing that really happened is that as it straightened its back and shoulders, the hair kind of bristled on his shoulders a little bit. But I'm not sure if that was just the natural separating of its hair as it erected its posture, or if this was in fact a bristling, like a display of, anxiety, or, like, hey, don't get too close. I don't know which of those it was. All I know is that the hair separated on its shoulders, but there was absolutely no overt aggression. There was no odor. There was no nothing. He just looked over his shoulder at me. I saw his face in profile, and then he just went right back to what he was doing. Like he couldn't care less that I was standing right behind him.
Interesting, because they are known to put off an odor, and I've smelled them on one occasion, and I'm absolutely certain that that's what I smelled during. And I think they can control that. I think it's something that they can emit under certain circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, I was involved in an investigation on a wilderness area known as the Roaring River Wilderness. Roaring River is a tributary that goes into the Clackamas drainage, not far from here, maybe 40 miles as the crow flies. And this particular situation that was brought to my attention, where this gentleman was a amateur rock hound, if you will, and he knew that about a mile upstream from the mouth of the river, it's a very rough country. It's very difficult to travel into, no trails. He knew there was a place where there was a lava flow that goes into the river. And when summer comes around and the water level drops down, it exposes this lava. And in that lava, embedded in the lava, is what he called common opal. So he went in there that day along with his full-grown Australian Shepherd, and proceeds to go down to this lava flow with a metal hammer and a metal chisel and his little collection bag, and started chipping out pieces of this opal. And you can imagine, if you're in the woods, the sound of metal on metal is a very not unnatural sound, and in this case, it attracted a Sasquatch. What's funny is his dog was very upset. His dog was let to wander while he was down on the river, and the dog just bristled at something, started growling. It didn't bark at all. It was just growling. So it just went on for a while. He decided to go check it out, and he got to where the dog was at. He figured it had a squirrel cornered or something, and he looked in the direction the dog was looking, and he said, he didn't even call it a Bigfoot. He said, "I saw a gorilla standing on two legs, looking at my dog, and with every time it exhaled, it was grunting, and it was not happy. Did not. He said it was just like, "Ruh, uh, uh." and at that he shoved the dog off this log it was standing on, and they both ran for their lives. And uncharacteristically, this thing took chase. And it was pretty hairy, no pun intended. It's things they're going through 4-foot tall ferns and jumping over logs and rocks, and this thing is in pursuit.
Oh, man.
And he said at any time this thing could have caught them if it wanted to. It was basically bluff charging them and running them out of its territory. And so myself and another friend met him at the mouth of the river, and we hiked back in there. And we took photos, we looked for tracks, and we made a measurement from where the dog was and where this thing was. They were only 47 feet apart. And what's interesting, though, we did what we could as far as, in fact, what was really cool was when we got there, here's his chisel and hammer and collection bag laying there on the bank. So that kind of validated his story.
Oh, yeah.
But we walked back out the same route we had taken in, and we came to this spot on our course that we had, again, the same route we had taken in. We got to this point where this ungodly odor was suddenly there that wasn't there 30 minutes earlier. The physics of it was really bizarre as well, because you didn't smell it like if you were coming up on a skunk or something. It didn't get stronger and stronger and stronger. It was, you were either in it or you weren't. It was very, I don't know. It was very zonal, if you will. You could take 5 steps and you'd be in it, and you could step back 5 feet and not smell it at all. Whatever it was very concentrated and just in that one area. And again, it wasn't there 30 minutes earlier. But
Right.
I'm telling you, it smelled like death. It smelled like rotting meat, like a roadkill or whatever. Why wasn't it there 30 minutes earlier? I don't know. But whatever caused that had to have been right there in that area just before we reached that spot.
Right.
And I think it saw us coming, and it just left us a little calling card.
Yeah.
But there was nothing there to attribute it to. We even did a small grid search of the area to find the source of it, and we could not find it.
No sign or anything?
No. And again, we walked back to it, and it's still there, and it smelled like rancid meat. It was just, but I think they use it somewhat as a like you say, a defensive message, if you will, that you're getting too close.
Oh, yeah. They just spritzed it around a little bit for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, and like you say, it doesn't happen in all occasions. You were 15 feet away. If they always smelled that way,
I would have smelled it.
you would have smelled it. Yeah. So
Right.
that's a fascinating story, though. 15 feet. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. And it got me.
And I bet it changed your life.
It did. Even before that, though, like my whole life, I've had incredible experiences that have shown me that the nature of reality is much broader than the mainstream view of it. So it wasn't the sort of thing where it just totally just rearranged my worldview because my reality would not have allowed for such a thing. So I was open to things, and it didn't just blow me away that way. But I mean, Sasquatch in particular was not really on my radar or in my thoughts. But so yeah, once I had this experience, it certainly directed my attention towards Sasquatch, and I'm hooked. I need to know the answers.
Yeah. Well, it really opens your mind to other possibilities that I would not normally have considered.
Yeah.
And like I say, the more I research, the more I find out, and the more questions I come up with. But for me, it was life changing. Obviously, it seems like everything leads back to Bigfoot for me. I, I I still can't get over how just 25 seconds of my entire adult life at that point was forever changed. The rest of my life.
Completely changed the trajectory. It's a moment of fate, if there ever was one.
Yeah, and like I say, it's set me on a path that is still evolving, and I will probably spend the rest of my life continuing to do my research and try to answer some questions and hopefully get closer to the truth and again with the long term goal of getting them some sort of protections on the books and it's just been a fascinating trip for me.
Right. And I, for one, am glad that you're out there doing what you're doing. It's something that has to be done. I think we're being confronted with that. We have to learn about Sasquatch right now, and all the unfolding, the having more questions now than you had before. I mean, that's just part of the whole evolution in consciousness. I think I see. I know you don't like to get way out in the woo factor, but I see a design behind it all.
Absolutely.
And I'll be right out there with you, stomping around through the woods looking for evidence. As a matter of fact, if you do not object, in a couple of weekends, I will be joining you camping at the Bigfoot trap.
That would be fantastic. I'm actually planning to go down there. I've yet to see it. I've seen photos of it, but it's kind of I don't know, it's a Bigfoot mecca, if you will. It's something to, check the block, get the T-shirt, say you saw it. But it's pretty cool. It was built back in the 70s. A guy actually got a permit to build it, and it's very stout. It's built with telephone poles on all four corners and very heavy beams held together with metal strapping, and basically it has a very heavy steel door that if something would to go in there, it would trip it and in theory trap it in there. I don't know if the gentleman that built it is even still alive, but it's basically become uh, so we say a tourist trap. But for safety reasons, they've welded the door in the open position so nobody gets guillotined by that thing. But I'll be going down there once I get back from Arkansas, where I'm heading this weekend to address a group at a conference in the Ouachita Mountains of Arkansas.
Yeah.
And then that following weekend, I'll be going down there to check it out with some friends. And yeah, when you come up, we'll make that a definitely part of the trip.
For
And
sure.
I'd love to show you around some of our research areas up here around the mountain.
Oh, I'd love that. Yeah. Anything you want to show me, I want to see it for sure, Todd. Speaking of Arkansas, why don't you let us know what you're up to?
Well, they have a conference that's held at this very large farm called the Blue Farm. They've got zip lines there, I guess, for tourists, and but they're going to put me up in what they call their glamping tent, which, from what I hear, has got a full bed and chairs and a refrigerator and everything in it. So I'll be staying there, and I'll be addressing them both Saturday and Sunday. I fly out this Thursday. And then this coming spring, I've already been invited to speak in Nebraska, Ohio, and Virginia. So,
All right.
yeah, and it's great. I love getting out there and meeting new people and comparing notes and getting even more ideas and seeing different parts of the country. And so, yeah, it's been, like I say, it's been a real life changer for me, and I enjoy doing podcasts like yours. I was recently featured on the History Channel's The Unexplained with William Shatner. And I'll be working. I've got 2 documentaries we're working on, and I just got the History Channel reached out to me again and want me to get involved in another series called History's Greatest Mysteries, and that's narrated by Lawrence Fishburne.
Oh, sweet.
So that'll be fun. Yeah. Working on another documentary with Doug Hajicek, which is Sasquatch Meets Science. And this will be the second in a series, and it'll be a 2-hour special.
Oh, excellent.
And I've got another documentary that's scheduled to come out in January, so should be a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. Excellent. I look forward to seeing all your future projects. Now, if anybody wants to learn about the American Primate Conservancy, or if they want to get in touch with you, like maybe to report sightings, what's your contact information and website and stuff?
Sure. We have a website. It's americanprimate.org. O-R-G. And there is a reporting feature on there as well. Tells a little bit about our mission and future events, and our ultimate goal, of which is building a world-class Bigfoot interpretive center somewhere here in the Cascades. And so we can be reached on that site. I can be reached directly by email. My email address is americanprimate@aol.com. And I encourage anybody, if you have any questions or if you have an experience you'd like to share, just reach out to me, and we treat everything professionally, and we take your stories seriously, and we keep them confidential.
Oh, excellent. Well, there is always so much to talk about in Bigfoot, and especially with someone like you who's been doing this for such a long time and has had so many experiences. There's always stuff to talk about, and I want to hear about all of it eventually. So I hope you come back on the show really soon, and I look forward to meeting you in person in a couple of weeks.
That'll be great. Yeah, and I should mention real quick, we do have some Facebook pages out there that I would encourage people to go to. I have one just strictly under my name, Todd Neiss, Neiss. But we have one for the Conservancy, and you can just look up American Primate Conservancy. It's the name of the Facebook page. And we have a third site, which is dedicated to our annual gathering of researchers. We have been putting this together this will be our 15th year. And it's very unique in that it's invitation only, and it's not open to the public. It's strictly researchers from around the world. We get together once a year for 4 days and share our work, network with each other. It's called Beachfoot. Kind of a corny name, but it's just based on the fact that we hold these gatherings in the Coast Range, or in some cases right close to the beach, and so it just kind of stuck. And it's really just kind of taken on a life of its own. We've had researchers come in from as far away as Australia, England, Russia, New Zealand, and all across the U.S. And Canada. So I would encourage your listeners to go to the Beachfoot Facebook page and just browse through the gallery, the photo gallery, and pretty much everyone who's in Bigfooting has been there at one time or another.
Right.
And we like to get it was just a brainchild of mine back in 2008. I thought, God, all these amazing people I've met, what would it be like to get them all together at once? And it just worked out that way. So,
Oh, yeah.
and there is also on YouTube, real quick, a friend of mine did a 10-year anniversary documentary about Beachfoot and did an amazing job putting it together. And you can find that out there, as well as also on YouTube. We did a expedition in Canada, which we dubbed Operation Sea Monkey, and it was a very unique approach to bigfooting from a maritime platform. We took a 50-foot trawler and went out of Campbell River, which is on Vancouver Island, and we covered about 140 miles in 6 days and anchored off these remote islands known as the Broughton Archipelago. And we're putting together a documentary on that. There is a trailer out there, though, that's about 4 minutes long that will give you kind of an idea of what we're up to. We had a great team, and it was an amazing adventure.
Yeah, I look forward to all things upcoming pertaining to Operation Sea Monkey. I've I've had my eye on that. I'm waiting for the developments, as I think we all are. Everybody who's interested in Bigfoot. It's been great having you on the show, and like I said, there's always stuff to talk about. So I hope you come back really soon, and I'll be seeing you soon. So Todd Neiss.
I would like that.
Yeah, I would too.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on Type 471. If you'd like to share your experiences with the extraordinary with me, email me at type471podcast@gmail.com. You can also connect with me across social media. Look for Type 471 Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Look for Type 471 Podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and check out the Type 471 Podcast YouTube channel. The YouTube videos contain all media associated with each episode. Be sure to like and subscribe. I'm Sam Kitchen. Thanks for listening to Type 471.